So we're playing the Battles of July 1st scenario, 3-turn scenario. We start with turn 1. Let's take a quick look at the general situation. This scenario will feature actions in 2 parts of the map. We have actions that will arise from the northern side of the map near the town of El Caney, where Spanish forces have deployed around the town. And also, from turn 2 onwards, we will see actions going on around Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill. The posts that you see there are objective hexes that the Americans have to occupy by the end of turn 3 in order to win, and also have to have suffered less than 9 steps of losses. And during the first turn of the game, the only units that can move are those units in and around El Caney that you see there, Spanish and American units. American units that are around Bivouac Area 1, Area 2, and Area 3. And those in Area 3 are those 3 regiments from the 2nd Division. All remaining units, including all those that are near Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill, cannot move in turn 1. So we go to the first phase, the weather phase. This is skipped unless we're playing the campaign game that covers all 28 turns. We're in turn 1 of a 3-turn game, so this is going to be skipped in all 3 turns of our game. Next is the U.S. supply phase. All U.S. units on the map, including those around El Caney, can trace a line of supply of 7 hexes to a road or trail that leads to the hex that you see there with the silver pin, which is hex 0937, and the same can be said of U.S. forces in the vicinity of Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill. So all U.S. units are in supply. Next is the U.S. command phase. To be in command, units have to trace a line of hexes which is equal or less than their commander's command range. You see, for example, the commander of the volunteer units, General Duffield, has a command range of 4, signified by that number in the center bottom of his counter. By special rule also, during turn 1, all units are deemed to be in command. So none will suffer any penalties of being out of command, like, for example, the limitation of just being able to move 1 hex. So all U.S. units are in command. Next is the U.S. reinforcement withdrawal phase. We're in turn 1, and the U.S. do have a reinforcement, this Gatling gun unit. And the Gatling gun unit appears at El Pozo. And we place the unit on that village hex. On to the U.S. movement phase. And as stated before, all units that you see on the screen cannot move in the first turn except the 3 regiments from the U.S. 2nd Division. So those units will be marching in the direction of their brothers in the same division that are in the vicinity of El Caney. And here are the positions of the units after movement. Now, the U.S. player moves the units in the vicinity of El Caney. And here we see the positions of the American units after movement. On to the U.S. combat phase, and in this phase, first the U.S. player designates which units will be assaulting adjacent Spanish hexes. Then the Spanish can conduct defensive fire, followed by the U.S. conducting defensive fire, and then we resolve the U.S. assault. So the Americans announced that they will be assaulting with their 17th and 7 regiments, hex 2631. That's a hill hex that has an entrenchment occupied by a Spanish company. And we mark those with red pegs. Now, the Spanish have to resolve defensive fire, and they can fire at units which are adjacent or 2 hexes away at half strength. The Spanish company in the entrenchment will fire at the 17th Regiment, and for purposes of defensive fire against assaulting units, the assaulting units are considered to be in the terrain where they are assaulting. That's a hill hex. And as a result of this, there will be a +1 die roll modifier, which of course benefits the Americans. No other modifiers apply, so we roll 1d10 on the 2 column because that's the strength of the Spanish units. And the roll is a 9 modified to a 10, no effect. So next, the other Spanish company, which is actually at Fort El Viso, fires at the American 12th Regiment in hex 2532. That's a clear terrain hex. We also roll on the number 2 column and no modifiers apply this time. And the roll is a 6, no effect. So Spanish fire against the assaulting units and those nearby has been ineffective. The Spanish can also fire at the 2nd Massachusetts, but this would be long-range fire by the Spanish company in hex 2429. So that unit would fire with a 1 combat strength factor. But there would be a modifier because the American unit has a red combat factor. That signifies that it uses black powder. So this fire combat is resolved in the number 1 column, but with a -1 die roll modifier. We roll 1d10, and the roll is a 6 modified to a 5, still no effect. No other Spanish units can conduct offensive fire in the vicinity of El Caney. So now the Americans conduct offensive fire, and the Americans will fire with their 12th Regiment, and they will fire at the Spanish company in the entrenchment at hex 2631. And that Spanish unit is entrenched on a hill. In this game, we use the terrain that is most advantageous to the target unit. Hill and entrenchment are equally advantageous, so there will be a +1 die roll modifier. The Americans fire with 7 fire factors. So we roll on the 6 to 10 column. But the roll is a 9, also no effect. So now we move on to the 2nd Massachusetts, which is at long range, 2 hexes from the Spanish units at hex 2429, and it can fire at half strength with 4 combat factors. There's a +1 die roll modifier because the Spanish units are entrenched. And another 9, no effect. And now Battery E of the 1st Artillery in hex 2130 has a line of sight to the Spanish units in hex 2429 in that entrenchment hex, and it can now fire, and it has a strength of 4. So we roll once again on the 3 to 5 column with a +1 die roll modifier for the entrenchment where the defenders are. A 6 modified to a 7, no effect. And that concludes both fire phases. Now we move on to resolve the assault on the Spanish entrenchment in hex 2631. Assault combat in this game is odds-based. There's a series of modifications that have to be made for terrain from which the attacking forces are attacking, and also the terrain of the defending forces. So we take first the 17th Regiment, strength of 6. It is attacking an entrenched defender, so its combat factors are half to 3, and the defenders are on a hill, so they're halved again to 1.5. And then the 7th Regiment is attacking across the river, so its combat factors are halved to 4.5, and then halved again because of the entrenchments to 2.2, and then halved again because of the hill where the defenders are to 1.1. So we add 1.5 to 1.1, and that is 2.6, and we round it down to 2. So the attack will be 2 combat factors against 2 defending combat factors. So we will be rolling in the 1 to 1 column, but there's still some modifiers to apply, +1 because the defenders occupy a hill hex, and a +1 because all defending units are within command range of an appropriate leader, which is General Del Rey. So we roll 1d10 with a +2 die roll modifier. The roll is a 3 modified to a 5, attacker morale check. Now we will roll for each of the units to conduct a morale check. And notice that none of the modifiers listed there will apply. The units are not in command because they're not within command range, that is 4 hexes away from their commander, General Lawton. Here we see the morale ratings of each of the sides. For the US, that is 7. So the US has to roll 0 to 7 to pass the morale check. So we roll first for the 17th Regiment. The roll is a 4, so it passes. And now we roll for the 7th. And the roll is a 1, so it also passes. It's morale check. That's the end of the assault. Now we go to the out of supply morale check phase, where the US player conducts morale checks for his units that are marked out of supply. However, no US units are marked out of supply, so we go to the next phase. And it's the Spanish supply phase. And all Spanish units, those in the vicinity of El Caney, as well as those in the vicinity of Kettle and San Juan Hills, can trace supply to the city of Santiago. Now to the Spanish command phase. And as stated before, in the first turn of the game, this phase is skipped. We don't check for command or for units that are out of command. It's a Spanish reinforcement and withdrawal phase. The Spanish have no reinforcements or units to withdraw in this turn. Next is the Spanish movement phase. And as was the case with the American units, the Spanish units in the vicinity of Kettle and San Juan Hills cannot move in the first turn. So the only Spanish units that could move are those in the vicinity of El Caney. And the Spanish have withheld the initial assault northeast of Fort El Viso, so they will keep their positions, hold their ground, and not move. Next is the Spanish combat phase, where the Spanish can announce any assaults, then the US player can conduct defensive fire, then the Spanish player conducts offensive fire combat, and finally the Spanish player could resolve any assaults. The Spanish will not mark any units as assaulting any US hexes, so now the US conducts defensive fire. First, the 17th Regiment will fire at the Spanish unit in the entrenchment hex in hex 2631, and the US will attack with 6 combat factors, and there's a +1 die roll modifier because the defenders are in an entrenchment. The roll is an 8 modified to a 9, no effect. Next, the 7th Regiment will fire at the entrenched Spaniards in hex 2631, and we roll on the 6 to 10 column with +1 as a die roll modifier. The roll is a 5 modified to a 6, also no effect. And now the 12th Regiment will also fire at the same entrenched Spanish unit, and we roll on the 6 to 10 column. A 7 modified to an 8, also no effect. Battery E of the 1st Artillery now fires at the entrenched Spaniards in hex 2429, and it rolls on the 3 to 5 column. An 8 modified to a 9, no effect. Now the 2nd Massachusetts fires at the same defenders, rolling on the 6 to 10 column with a +1 die roll modifier. A 4 modified to a 5, no effect. If the roll would have been a 3 or less, there would have been at least 1 step lost. That's the end of the US defensive fire phase. Now to the Spanish offensive fire phase, and we have the defenders in the entrenchments in hex 2631. They will fire at the 17th Regiment, and they roll on the 2 column with no modification. The roll is a 0. That causes a loss of 1 step on the American defenders. So we have to break down that regiment, and they will lose one of the 1/6s. And we place the 1/6 and 2/6 breakdown units in the hex that was occupied by the regiment counter. And now the other company one that is at Fort El Viso fires at U.S. Regiment 12, and it rolls on the 2 column with no modification. The roll is a 2, so the 12th Regiment suffers a step loss. So we break down the regiment and eliminate the 1/6, and the remaining 2 units are placed in the space formerly occupied by the regiment count. Things are not going well for the Americans, and now the Spanish company in the entrenchment at Hex 2429 fires, but this would be long-range fire by the Spanish company in Hex 2429 with a 1 combat strength factor. The roll is a 2 modified to a 1, and the defenders suffer a step loss. We eliminate one of the 2/6 breakdown units, and the remaining 2 2/6s are placed where the regimental counter was. So far, the Americans have lost 3 steps. That's the end of the Spanish combat phase. Onto the Spanish out-of-supply morale check phase, but there's no units for which to check morale. The Spanish have no units that are out of supply. So now we go to the end phase. There are no broken units. There is no check to be made for the observation balloon to be eliminated. It hasn't been deployed. The Spanish do not roll for surrender. We're not playing the campaign game. So we move on to turn number 2. This is a situation at the end of the first turn. The American attacks around El Caney completely failed. The Americans lost 3 steps, and the Spanish defenses and defenders are intact. Now in the second turn, we will see action around Kettle and San Juan Hills. Now important will be the approach of the 2nd Division. The 2nd Division has all the units that you see here in command, and that's 5 regiments, 3 which are already on a road, which these units could advance to try to overtake the Spanish defenses from the north. However, the Spanish remaining units of the 2nd Division will be out of command. They will all only be able to move 1 hex, and so those units will be moving very slowly and may not be a factor in the game for much longer. So stick around for the next turn of this scenario, the battles of July 1 in A Splendid Little War. And this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.